there is a kind of glow that cannot be bought, painted, or imitated. It does not come from perfection. It comes from alignment. True glow is something the world often misunderstands. It is not the shine created by lights, filters, or admiration from others. It is not the kind of beauty that depends on being seen, praised, or validated. What most people call glow is often just attention, and attention fades. It changes with trends, with opinions, with time. But the glow that comes from within is different. It does not fade when the room is empty. It does not disappear when no one is watching. It remains steady and quiet because it is rooted in something deeper than appearance. This kind of glow begins in a place most people avoid, the inner world. It begins when a woman starts to look at herself without distraction, without noise, without running away. At first, there may be discomfort. There may be things she does not like, truths she has ignored, emotions she has buried. But instead of escaping, she stays. She listens. She observes. And slowly, she begins to understand herself beyond the surface. From that understanding, something shifts. She no longer defines herself by how others see her. She begins to see herself clearly, without distortion. And in that clarity, there is peace. Not the kind of peace that depends on everything going right, but a deeper calm that comes from being honest with oneself. This honesty becomes the foundation of her glow. When a woman is honest with herself, she stops pretending. She stops trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for her. She stops shrinking to make others comfortable or expanding just to be noticed. She simply becomes. And in that state of being, there is a quiet confidence. Not loud, not forced, but natural. It is the confidence of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. This inner alignment reflects outward in ways that cannot be faked. Her eyes begin to carry a certain stillness. Her presence becomes grounding. People may not always understand it, but they feel it. There is something different about her energy. It is not restless. It is not seeking. It is settled. She takes care of herself, not out of insecurity, but out of respect. Her choices are no longer driven by fear of judgment, but by a deep sense of self-worth. She eats, speaks, moves, and lives in a way that supports her well-being, because she knows she deserves that care. And this self-respect adds to her glow in a way no external effort ever could. There is also a lightness that comes with this inner glow, not because life becomes easy, but because she is no longer carrying unnecessary weight. She lets go of the need to impress. She releases the pressure to be perfect. She no longer compares herself constantly to others. All of these things once drained her energy, dimmed her spirit, and created a false version of herself. Now, without them, her energy becomes free. And when energy is free, it flows naturally. This flow is what creates that effortless radiance people notice. It is not something she tries to show. In fact, the more she stops trying, the more visible it becomes. Because authenticity has a power that imitation can never reach. There is also strength in this glow, but it is not harsh. It is gentle, yet unshakable. She knows who she is, and that knowing protects her. She is not easily influenced by opinions, not easily broken by rejection, not easily lost in confusion. Even when challenges come, she returns to herself. That ability to return again and again keeps her grounded. Her glow is also connected to her values. She lives in alignment with what truly matters to her. She does not compromise her integrity for temporary gain. She does not abandon her principles to fit in. This alignment creates a sense of wholeness within her. She is not divided between who she is and who she pretends to be. And in that wholeness, there is a quiet power that others can feel. Over time, this inner glow becomes her natural state. It is no longer something she thinks about. It is simply who she is. It shows in her presence, in her energy, in the way she carries herself through the world. And even in silence, it speaks. Because true glow is not about being seen. It is about being aligned. There comes a moment, often quiet and almost invisible, when a woman realizes she has been saying yes to things that do not feel right. Not because she wants to, but because she has been taught to keep the peace, to be liked, to avoid conflict, to meet expectations that were never truly hers. For a long time, it may not even feel like betrayal. It feels normal. It feels necessary. But deep within, there is a subtle tension, a soft resistance, a voice that whispers, "This is not me." Self-betrayal does not always appear as something dramatic. It lives in the small moments. The moments when she ignores her intuition, when she silences her truth to avoid discomfort, when she stays in conversations that drain her, in relationships that exhaust her, in situations that slowly take more than they give. Each time she chooses against herself, she moves a little further away from her center. At first, the cost is not obvious. Life continues. People around her remain pleased. There are no immediate consequences. But inside, something begins to fade. Her energy feels heavier. Her mind becomes restless. There is a quiet dissatisfaction that no amount of external approval can fix, because the deeper issue is not outside. It is the distance she has created within herself. The moment she begins to notice this pattern is the beginning of change. Awareness brings discomfort, but it also brings clarity. She starts to see how often she has chosen fear over truth. Fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of standing alone. And she realizes that every time she chose fear, she abandoned a part of herself. This realization can feel overwhelming. There may be guilt, regret, even frustration. She may question why she allowed it for so long. But instead of turning that awareness into self-judgment, she begins to see it as a lesson, a necessary step toward alignment. Because you cannot return to yourself without first seeing where you have left yourself. Slowly, she begins to listen again, not to the noise of the world, but to the quiet voice within. It does not shout. It does not force. It simply speaks with honesty. Sometimes it tells her to step back. Sometimes it tells her to walk away. Sometimes it tells her to speak, even when her voice shakes. And this time, she pays attention. Choosing to honor that voice is not easy. It requires courage. It requires discomfort, because the moment she stops betraying herself, things begin to shift. People may not understand her changes. Some may resist them. Others may question her. The same yes that once made her accepted is now replaced with a no that may create distance. But she understands something deeper now. A yes to others that costs her inner peace is not kindness. It is disconnection. And a no that protects her truth is not selfish. It is alignment. With each honest choice, she begins to rebuild trust within herself, a trust that was weakened over time through repeated self-betrayal. Now, every time she listens to her intuition and acts accordingly, that trust grows stronger. She starts to feel more stable within, more grounded, more certain. There is also a sense of relief that comes with this shift. The exhaustion of pretending begins to fade. She no longer has to calculate every word, every action, every response to maintain an image. She becomes more natural, more at ease. Not because everything is perfect, but because she is no longer divided within herself. This does not mean she becomes rigid or closed off. She still cares. She still gives. But now her actions come from a place of choice, not obligation, from authenticity, not fear. She learns that honoring herself does not mean rejecting others. It means no longer rejecting herself. As she continues on this path, her sensitivity to what feels right and wrong becomes sharper. She recognizes misalignment more quickly. She notices when something drains her energy, when something feels forced, when something is not in harmony with who she is becoming. And instead of ignoring these signals, she responds to them. There is a quiet strength in this way of living. It is not loud or aggressive. It does not seek to control or dominate. It simply stands firm in truth. And this firmness creates a sense of safety within her, a feeling that no matter what happens externally, she will not abandon herself again. Over time, the habit of self-betrayal is replaced with the practice of self-honoring. It becomes natural to pause, to check in, to listen before responding. It becomes natural to choose what aligns, even if it is not the easiest option. And with each aligned choice, she moves closer to a state of wholeness. Because the more she stops betraying herself, the more she returns to who she has always been underneath the layers of conditioning, expectation, and fear. There is a subtle habit that quietly shapes the way many women move through the world: the need for validation. It does not always appear obvious. Sometimes it hides behind kindness, behind effort, behind the desire to do things well. But beneath it, there is often a question that keeps repeating itself. Am I enough? And instead of answering that question from within, she looks outward, waiting for others to confirm what she has not yet fully claimed for herself. Viewvalation can feel comforting. A compliment, a message, a sign of approval. It brings a temporary sense of worth. For a moment, she feels seen. For a moment, she feels secure. But that feeling does not last. It fades quickly, and when it does, the need returns. So she seeks it again, sometimes without even realizing it. Adjusting herself, refining herself, shaping her behavior in ways that increase the chances of being accepted, appreciated, or admired. Over time, this creates a quiet dependency. Her sense of self becomes tied to reactions, to responses, to how others perceive her. If she is praised, she feels elevated. If she is ignored or criticized, she feels diminished. Her inner state begins to fluctuate based on external feedback, like a reflection that changes depending on the angle of the light. At first, this may seem harmless. After all, human beings naturally respond to connection and recognition. But the deeper issue is not the presence of validation. It is the reliance on it. Because when her worth is placed in the hands of others, she loses stability within herself. She becomes more cautious, more calculated, more concerned with maintaining approval than expressing truth. The shift begins when she starts to notice this pattern. She sees how often her choices are influenced by how they will be received rather than how they truly feel. She recognizes the moments where she hesitates to speak honestly, not because she is unsure, but because she fears disapproval. And in that awareness, something becomes clear. The constant search for validation is slowly disconnecting her from her own voice. This realization does not immediately free her. In fact, it can feel uncomfortable at first. Letting go of validation means stepping into uncertainty. It means making choices without knowing how they will be received. It means expressing herself without guarantees of acceptance. And this can feel like standing without a support, like walking without a clear path. But within that uncertainty, there is also space to listen inward, space to ask a different question. Not, do they approve of me? But, does this feel true to me? This shift in questioning changes everything. Because instead of looking outward for direction, she begins to turn inward for guidance. She starts to build a relationship with herself that is no longer based on performance. She learns to sit with her own thoughts without needing immediate reassurance. She allows herself to have opinions, preferences, and boundaries that are not shaped by external expectations. And slowly, she begins to trust her own judgment. This trust does not appear all at once. It is built through small, consistent choices. Every time she chooses honesty over approval, it grows. Every time she expresses herself without seeking validation, it strengthens. Every time she resists the urge to adjust herself just to be accepted, it deepens. There is also a quiet liberation that comes with this shift. The pressure to be liked by everyone begins to fade. She understands that not everyone will agree with her, and that is no longer a threat. It becomes a natural part of life. She no longer sees disagreement as rejection, nor does she see approval as confirmation of her worth. Her energy changes. It becomes more stable, more grounded. She is no longer pulled in different directions by different opinions. She remains centered, even when others react. This does not mean she becomes indifferent or closed off. She still listens. She still reflects. But she does not lose herself in the process. There is also a deeper sense of peace that begins to emerge. The constant need to check, to compare, to measure herself against others starts to dissolve. She no longer needs to constantly evaluate where she stands in the eyes of the world. Instead, she stands within herself. And from this place, her interactions change. She gives without needing something in return. She connects without trying to impress. She speaks without filtering every word through the lens of approval. There is a natural ease in the way she moves because she is no longer carrying the weight of needing to be validated. This does not mean she never appreciates recognition. Appreciation can still be received, enjoyed, and acknowledged, but it no longer defines her. It becomes something that adds to her experience, not something that determines her value. As she continues on this path, the question, am I enough, begins to lose its power. Not because she has found a perfect answer, but because she no longer needs to ask it in the same way. Her sense of enoughness is no longer dependent on external confirmation. It becomes something quieter, deeper, and more constant. And in that quiet certainty, she finds a kind of freedom that cannot be given by others and cannot be taken away. There is a quiet shift that happens when a woman begins to choose peace over attention. At first, it may not even feel like a choice. It may feel like a loss, a stepping back from noise, from visibility, from the constant movement that once made her feel involved, seen, and included. Attention has a way of creating an illusion of importance. It fills the space with stimulation, with interaction, with a sense that something is always happening. And in that constant activity, it becomes easy to mistake busyness for fulfillment. For a long time, attention can feel like a source of energy. The more she receives, the more she feels recognized. It can come through conversations, through social spaces, through the subtle ways people respond to her presence. And without realizing it, she begins to adapt herself to maintain that flow. She may speak more than she needs to, share more than she feels, or remain in environments that are loud but empty, just to avoid the discomfort of being unseen. But attention is unpredictable. It rises and falls. It depends on timing, on people, on circumstances that are constantly changing. And when it fades, it often leaves behind a quiet emptiness, a feeling that something is missing, even though nothing real has been taken away. This is when she begins to notice that attention, while stimulating, does not bring lasting calm. It excites the surface, but it does not settle the depth. Peace, on the other hand, feels very different. It is not loud. It does not demand recognition. It does not try to prove anything. In fact, it often exists in spaces where attention is absent. In silence, in stillness, in moments where nothing is being displayed or exchanged. At first, this can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because without constant stimulation, she is left alone with herself. And this is where the real shift begins. Instead of reaching outward to fill the space, she starts to sit within it. She begins to notice her thoughts, her emotions, the patterns that once went unnoticed because they were covered by noise. There may be restlessness at first, a desire to escape back into distraction. But she stays a little longer each time. And slowly, that restlessness begins to soften. Choosing peace means letting go of the need to always be part of something. It means accepting that not every moment needs to be shared. Not every thought needs to be expressed. Not every silence needs to be filled. It is a quiet withdrawal from the idea that constant visibility equals value. This does not mean she isolates herself or disconnects from the world. It means she becomes more intentional about where she places her energy. She begins to notice which environments leave her feeling calm and which leave her feeling drained, which conversations nourish her and which simply pass time. And instead of choosing based on habit or fear of missing out, she chooses based on how she feels within. There is a certain strength in this kind of choice, because it often goes against what is encouraged. The world tends to reward visibility, activity, and constant engagement. Stepping away from that can feel like going against the current. It may lead to fewer interactions, fewer distractions, fewer moments of being noticed. But what it gives in return is something far more stable. With peace, her mind becomes clearer. She is no longer pulled in multiple directions by external noise. Her thoughts slow down. Her decisions become more grounded. She is able to see situations more clearly because she is not reacting from a place of overwhelm or urgency. Her energy also changes. It becomes more steady, more contained. Instead of being scattered across different places and people, it remains with her. This creates a sense of presence that is deeper and more focused. When she does engage, she is fully there. Not distracted, not divided, not seeking something in return. There is also a quiet confidence that grows from choosing peace. Not the kind that seeks to be seen, but the kind that does not need to be. She becomes comfortable with her own company, comfortable with silence, comfortable with moments where nothing is happening. And in that comfort, there is a sense of independence that attention could never provide. Over time, the desire for constant attention begins to fade naturally. Not because she forces it, but because she no longer needs it in the same way. She begins to see it for what it is: temporary, external, and often superficial. and she begins to value something deeper, something that does not fluctuate based on outside factors. Her relationships also begin to shift. She is no longer drawn to connections that are based only on surface level interaction or constant stimulation. She seeks depth, sincerity, and calm. And in doing so, the quality of her connections changes. They become fewer but more meaningful. Choosing peace over attention is not about rejecting the world. It is about no longer depending on it to feel whole. It is about finding a center within that remains steady, regardless of what is happening outside. And as she continues to choose this path again and again, that inner stillness becomes a part of her nature. Alignment is often spoken about as if it is something gentle and effortless, as if one simply decides to live in truth and everything falls into place. But in reality, alignment asks for something deeper. It asks for discipline. It asks for courage. It asks for a willingness to face discomfort again and again without turning away. Because to live in alignment is not just to understand what feels right. It is to consistently choose it, even when it is inconvenient, even when it is misunderstood, even when it feels lonely. Discipline is the quiet foundation of this process. Not the harsh, rigid kind that forces perfection, but a steady commitment to self-honesty. It is the ability to pause before reacting, to reflect before deciding, to remain aware of what is happening within. Without discipline, it becomes easy to fall back into old patterns. Patterns shaped by habit, by conditioning, by the need for comfort and familiarity. There will be moments when the easier path appears more appealing. Moments where avoiding truth feels simpler than facing it. Saying what others want to hear instead of what is real. Staying where it is familiar instead of stepping into the unknown. In these moments, discipline becomes the difference between temporary ease and lasting alignment. It is what allows her to choose what is right over what is easy. But discipline alone is not enough, because truth, when followed, often leads to discomfort. This is where courage becomes necessary. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to move forward despite it, to speak even when the voice feels unsteady, to walk away even when the heart feels heavy, to stand alone when staying would mean losing oneself. There is a particular kind of courage required when a woman begins to outgrow spaces that once felt familiar. Relationships, environments, patterns of behavior, things that once made sense may no longer align with who she is becoming. Letting go of these things is not always clean or easy. There may be attachment, history, emotion. There may be doubt about whether she is making the right choice. And yet, something within her knows. That quiet knowing does not always come with certainty, but it carries a sense of truth that is difficult to ignore. Following it requires stepping into the unknown. It requires trusting that even without clear answers, she is moving in the direction that is right for her. And this trust is built through courage, the courage to take steps without guarantees. Loneliness can become part of this journey, not as a permanent state, but as a passing phase. When she begins to choose alignment, she may find that fewer people understand her, fewer people relate to her choices. The paths begin to diverge, conversations change, connections shift, and in those moments, it can feel as though she is walking alone. This is where both discipline and courage meet. Discipline reminds her why she started. Courage helps her continue. Together, they create a steady movement forward. even when the path feels uncertain. There is also the challenge of facing oneself. Alignment is not only about external choices. It is also about internal honesty, seeing one's own patterns clearly, acknowledging fears, insecurities, habits that no longer serve. This requires a different kind of courage. The courage to look inward without avoidance, to accept what is seen without denial, to take responsibility without turning it into self-judgment. Discipline supports this process by creating consistency. Instead of only reflecting when things go wrong, she begins to check in with herself regularly. She becomes aware of her thoughts, her reactions, her emotional patterns. This awareness allows her to make adjustments, to realign when she feels off-center, to return to herself instead of drifting further away. Over time, this combination of discipline and courage creates strength. Not a forceful or aggressive strength, but a quiet resilience. The kind that does not break easily under pressure. The kind that remains steady even when things around her are uncertain, because she is no longer relying on external stability. She is building it within. This strength also brings clarity. Decisions become less confusing because they are no longer based on fear or approval. They are based on alignment. Even when choices are difficult, there is a sense of inner agreement, a feeling that, despite the discomfort, she is not betraying herself. There will still be moments of doubt, moments where the old ways seem tempting, moments where she questions whether the path of alignment is worth it. But each time she chooses to stay with her truth, she reinforces that inner foundation. Each time she faces discomfort, instead of avoiding it, she becomes more capable of handling it. In this way, alignment becomes a practice, not a destination that is reached once and maintained effortlessly, but a continuous process of choosing, adjusting, and returning. And with each step, discipline becomes more natural, courage becomes more familiar, and the path, though still challenging, becomes clearer. There is a subtle transformation that happens when a woman becomes aligned within herself. It is not something she announces, and it is not something she tries to display. In fact, the more aligned she becomes, the less interested she is in being seen for the sake of being seen. Yet, paradoxically, this is when her presence becomes the most noticeable, not because she is louder, but because she is clearer. Presence, in its truest form, is not about occupying space. It is about how one exists within that space. Before alignment, her presence may have been shaped by effort, trying to say the right things, to respond in ways that are accepted, to manage how she is perceived. There may have been a constant awareness of how she appeared to others, a subtle tension in the way she carried herself. This tension, even if hidden, affects energy. It creates a kind of noise beneath the surface. When she becomes aligned, that noise begins to dissolve. She is no longer divided between who she is and who she thinks she should be. There is no inner conflict pulling her in different directions. Her thoughts, her words, and her actions begin to move in the same direction. And when there is this kind of internal unity, her presence naturally becomes more grounded. She does not need to speak excessively to be noticed. In fact, her silence often carries more weight than words, because her silence is not empty, it is full. It holds awareness, observation, and a sense of calm that others can feel, even if they cannot explain it. When she listens, she is fully there, not waiting for her turn to speak, not distracted, not performing, just present. This kind of presence creates a sense of ease in those around her. People may feel more comfortable, more open, without knowing why. There is no pressure coming from her, no hidden need to impress or to control the interaction. She allows things to unfold naturally, without forcing outcomes. And this creates a space where authenticity can exist, not only within her, but also in others. Her energy becomes consistent. Before, it may have fluctuated depending on her environment, the people she was around, or the reactions she received. Now, there is a steadiness. Whether she is in a crowded place or alone, whether she is being noticed or not, she remains connected to herself. This consistency makes her presence feel reliable, grounded, and real. There is also a clarity in the way she expresses herself. Not because she has perfected communication, but because she is no longer filtering everything through fear or approval. What she says comes from a place of truth. It may be simple, it may be direct, but it carries sincerity. And sincerity has a power that polished words often lack. Even her movements begin to reflect this alignment. The way she walks, the way she sits, the way she carries herself. It all becomes more natural. There is no rush, no unnecessary tension, no need to occupy more space than required. She is comfortable in her own rhythm, and that comfort is visible. As her presence becomes more grounded, it also becomes more selective. Not in a way that excludes others, but in a way that honors her energy. She does not give her attention to everything. She does not engage in every conversation or react to every situation. She chooses where to place her focus, and this choice adds depth to her interactions. People may begin to notice that there is something different about her, not necessarily something they can define, but something they can feel, a sense of calm, of stability, of quiet confidence. This is not something she has tried to create. It is a natural result of alignment. When there is no internal chaos, there is no need for external compensation. Her presence also begins to influence her environment, not through force, but through resonance. Just as a calm body of water can settle what is disturbed, her grounded energy can bring a sense of stillness to situations that might otherwise feel scattered. This does not mean she controls everything around her, but her way of being has an effect. There is also a kind of independence in this presence. She is not seeking reactions. She is not adjusting herself based on how others respond. Whether she is acknowledged or overlooked, her state remains the same. This independence removes a layer of pressure that many people carry. The pressure to be seen, to be validated, to be confirmed. Without that pressure, she becomes more at ease. And ease has its own kind of magnetism. It draws attention not by demanding it, but by not needing it. Over time, this way of being becomes natural. She no longer thinks about how to be present. It is simply how she exists. There is a quiet harmony between her inner world and her outer expression. And in that harmony, her presence speaks without effort, without noise, without intention to impress. It is not something she turns on or off. It is not dependent on circumstances. It is a reflection of alignment, steady, calm, and unmistakably real. And in the end, she realizes something simple yet profound. The glow she was once searching for was never something she had to chase. It was never hidden in attention, in validation, or in becoming someone else. It was always within her, waiting for her to return, waiting for her to listen, waiting for her to choose herself again and again. And as she does, everything begins to fall into place. Not perfectly, but truthfully. She walks differently, not to be seen, but because she is grounded. She speaks differently, not to impress, but because she is clear. She lives differently, not to prove, but because she is aligned. And in this alignment, there is a quiet power. A power that does not need permission. A power that does not seek approval. A power that simply exists. This is where her glow becomes undeniable, not because the world finally sees her, because she finally sees herself. And from that moment on, she no longer searches for light. She becomes it.